All right, ladies and gentlemen, the last time that you saw this car, we had just gotten done converting this thing from a Vortec 4200 inline 6 to its little brother, the Vortec 3500 inline 5. The reason that we did this was because I wanted a little more room in the engine bay to work on the thing, and we successfully completed that. Shortly thereafter, we took the thing to the racetrack and we went an 889 with this thing. This inline 5 actually went faster than we ever went with the inline 6, and it's achieved every goal that I've wanted to accomplish with it. But in today's video, we're gonna change a few things up and start getting this thing ready for a new purpose, and that is to convert this thing to something that's a little more street friendly and a little bit more fun to drive. That's right, you saw the title. We are going to be converting from what we've been running in the car. This is a 4L80E from like a Silverado or something like that to an AR5. Now, as you guys know, the inline 4 and inline 5 Atlas engines came in the Chevy Colorado. They either were paired with a 4L60E transmission or an AR5. And this is not an AR5 from a Colorado. This is actually an AR5 from a Pontiac Solstice. The way that you can tell is that the Colorado transmission has the shifter more in this region here, and the Solstice has it further back here. Actually, in the factory location, it hangs all the way back here, and somebody has cut this thing apart and relocated the shifter to be further up. This actually works out really well for the Fairmont because we have to deal with the bench seat. Now, in the previous videos, you will have noticed that we were not running the bench seat, and I guess I'm going to spoil it for you. We're putting the bench seat back in it. So having the shifter a little further forward to be able to get around the bench seat is going to work out really well. Now, the Solstice did not come with an Atlas engine. It came with an Ecotec. But the bell housing for the AR5s is removable, and you can take the bell housing from a Chevy Colorado and bolt it onto a Solstice transmission, and that is what somebody has already done to this thing. Now, you can't really talk about these transmissions without talking about the company FabBot, and they're going to be helping out with a few parts to make this conversion possible into my station wagon, and they make a plethora of parts for these things, and they've also proven out the horsepower capabilities of these transmissions. The owner of FabBot has had one of these transmissions to high 800s at the wheel, but it has limited reliability at that power level. So we will be keeping the horsepower level around the 600 to 650 wheel horsepower. I think that will make this thing into quite the fun street car. We don't need to be making the 900 horsepower that we were previously putting to the 4L80E. But in order to get started on this, first we need to drop out the 4L80E from this car. So let's get to work. Alright guys, one thing I really like about this conversion is we are going to be able to get rid of our adapter plate. The AR5s came factory behind the Atlas 5-cylinder, so it should just bolt up and work. The problem is I rounded a few of the Allen bolts off, so now I'm going to have to weld a nut to them, and that is how I'm going to have to extract these from the oil pan and the block, but that's just how it goes sometimes. All right, let's get these things out. Oh, hey, pull over. You all right? last one's going to be difficult because it's up towards where the wiring is. I don't know. You jerk. This can come off and get used on another project. All right, guys, for the clutch and flywheel, we're going to go with something that might surprise a few people. This right here is actually a flywheel for a 4-cylinder, and believe it or not, they make upgraded clutches for the 4-cylinder. They also make them for the 5-cylinder, but I just happen to have this clutch and pressure plate laying around. This is a spec stage 5 single disc clutch for a 2.8 liter. These are rated for 750 pounds-feet of torque. I hope that it's not going to be too much of a nightmare on the street. I hope that, you know, the force on the spring there isn't so much that it's going to be a nightmare to sit there with the clutch in. And hopefully that's not so grabby that, you know, it makes it difficult to drive. But it's what I have. It's going to hold the power that I'd like to make with it. We're going to give it a shot. Also, we're going to install a set of upgraded flywheel bolts. These are actually for a 4.6 or a 5.4 liter mod motor, like a Ford. They just so happen to have the same thread and length that you need for the 4 and 5 cylinders. They actually work on the 6 cylinders as well. There's the part number for the guys that are trying to duplicate this setup. So next, let's get this thrown onto the engine, and then we can install the transmission. I gotta say a huge thanks to a man named Sumner for the clutch and pressure plate. He actually donated this to us quite a while ago. He was actually building a land speed car with the intent of using this clutch setup. We're gonna do you proud, Sumner. Hopefully we're gonna be making some cool noises very soon. Alright, next we need to set our air gap. Now the way that a clutch works is there are all these fingers that go around, and they are basically levers. They have a sort of a fulcrum point here in the top, and as you push down on the lever, it pulls the pressure plate away from the clutch. Now your throwout bearing goes right in here and pushes down on all of these fingers evenly, and that's how the clutch disengages. The problem is the clutch wears, and as the clutch disc gets thinner, these fingers will move away from the engine and get closer to the transmission. So you need to make sure that your slave cylinder and throwout bearing have adequate air gap between these fingers so that when the clutch wears, you have adequate amount of space for it to move out. You definitely don't want to have any preload on these fingers. That will cause excessive wear on the clutch, because essentially you would be driving around with the clutch slightly pushed in, and that can be really bad news because your clutch disc isn't getting adequate clamping force, and it's just a great way to burn up a clutch. So the guys over at FabBot, they recommend 3/16 of an inch. So the way that I'm going to measure that is I'm going to put a ruler across the face here and measure the distance to the bell housing with a set of calipers. And then we will go check the bell housing to the slave cylinder and see what the two measurements are and make sure that they jive together. Okay, we got 4.835, and I'm going to take an average of the two sides just to make sure that it isn't uneven, and if it is, then we'll just have an average. All right, so we're going to go with 4.800, because that's the average between the two. And now we're going to check the transmission. Alright, here's the tricky bit. This needs to get fully compressed so that we can measure it adequately. So this almost requires 4 hands, but yeah, here we are. It's just me today. Like this, and then let that fall, and then go like this. And then go like this. Right there. 4.129. So not even close. So there's a spacer in here that I'm going to take out. $9,875. So 9,875. So we need 125. Yeah, that looks right-ish. Oh. 4.89, 4.892. At this point, I was thinking that I would have to shim the bell housing of the transmission, but what I ended up doing was getting a whole different slave cylinder. I kind of wanted to replace the slave cylinder anyways, just to make sure that I had a brand new piece in there so I wouldn't have to screw with it later. And it turned out that the new slave cylinder had a different clearance, so it worked out. Alright, we now have our clutch air gap set. I had Dad machine a shim here to get this spaced correctly in order to get it so that when this is fully depressed, there is an air gap for the clutch. And I think it's time that we put this transmission into the car for the final time. So, let's get it in there. One thing we need to do before we put this into the car is we need to figure out how to make this shifter better. This thing is so sloppy, and frankly, the springs are so weak. I think it's going to be really easy to money shift this thing. Now, if you don't know what money shifting is, basically that's when you're rolling through the gears. You go first, you go second, and then you're going for third, but you accidentally put it back in first. This causes the engine to go to extreme amounts of RPM, and the reason they call it a money shift is because, well, it's going to cost you a whole lot of money. Now, normally, with aftermarket shifters, what they do is they put a heavy spring on this side so that it pushes the shifter towards the center more heavily, so that when you're going for that 2-3, that 2-3 shift, it helps guide the thing over. A lot of modern shifters actually have a lockout so that you cannot shift back into first from second without pulling a little pin. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of selection for these AR5s, at least with the Solstice AR5s. So I have another idea that we're going to try, and that is we are going to take these little springs here and modify them. Now, there aren't any aftermarket shifters for the Solstice AR5, but what I'm planning to do here is I'm planning to modify the shifter that is housed inside of the transmission. Now, there's two springs, one on either side, that sort of center this shaft in the, the 3-4 position. And what you'll see is there's a ton of additional travel here. You can see there's a big gap there, and we could take advantage of that gap and possibly set this thing up so that these springs apply a lot more force and make this thing feel less sloppy. So you can see I've already taken the spring out of this side, and here is what we plan to do. What we're gonna do is I've cut the cap off here, and we are going to take this and we are going to weld. And we're gonna drop it on the ground. We are going to take this and we're going to install a set screw on the outside of it so that we can dial in how much spring force is being applied to this little piston here. So we got to drop this guy down in here, and then we need to get a big enough set screw here so that we can slip our spring down past it. But this will essentially, I'm gonna drop this about 15 times. So we're gonna take this this nut here. This is a 7/16 coarse thread nut. We're gonna weld it onto the top here, and then that will allow us to still get the spring down through here. I want to avoid exposing this spring to any amount of heat. And then we will install a bolt in here with a little sort of receiver groove or receiver register, whatever you want to call it, in this area, and then we will dial in the amount of spring force that we want and have a little jam nut on here. And then we will have an adjustable shifter locating spring assembly, whatever you call this thing. And we're going to do that for both sides, and that will allow us to dial in as much force as we want to help center our shifter, and hopefully that will get us a much better shifter feel. So let's weld this on. All right, I only have it done on the one side so far, and it feels a lot better. Frankly, I'm amazed that nobody sells a product like this. I mean, maybe they do, and I just haven't been able to find it, but definitely an easy upgrade to help improve the feel of your shifter on your Solstice AR5. And for those that are wondering, it is 112 pounds. Not too shabby. placement, that's perfect. This thing's gonna be so much fun to drive. I can't wait. All right, next we gotta figure out the clutch pedal. Now, my Fairmont is originally an automatic car, so it does not have any provision for a clutch pedal. Luckily, there are a bunch of kits out there like this one that will convert an automatic pedal box into something that can support a manual. I decided to go with this one. This is from Malwood. It is an under-dash hydraulic unit. I didn't want to deal with having to find space in the engine bay or dealing with a cable-driven clutch like the factory is. I wanted something simple, and I wanted a hydraulic, and this one packages underneath the dash, so I decided to go with this. It includes all of the parts here to take your automatic pedal box and put a clutch pedal on it. So let's get this into the car so that we can start rowing gears in my station wagon. All right, guys, I almost have the Malwood pedal set up in the car, but I ran into a few issues. This bracket right here, I had to bend a little bit. This bend here put the master cylinder a little bit too far away from the pedal box, so I had to kind of straighten it out and then shorten this leg up a little bit, you know, bring this a little closer to here. Just because it was putting the master cylinder out of alignment. So just wanted to throw that out there. I realized that with, you know, Fox bodies and any old car, everybody's car is probably a little bit different. That's probably what I'm running into, but just kind of wanted to give you guys that little tip there. The only way you're going to bend this stuff is with a heavy hydraulic press, which is what I did. So just had to make a few tweaks here in order to get the bracket into the car. I'm going to be honest, this kit did not fit great. I had to climb in and out of the car many times, just making tweaks to the bracket in order to try to get it to fit. I probably should have pulled the pedal assembly out of the car and did it on the bench, but every time I thought I was close, I would find out that I wasn't, and I would have to climb my big butt in and out of the car again. And this is not a car that is very pleasant to do that in. So let's go to some footage of that. All right, final mods. I had to cut this back a bit. I had to cut this off and lengthen this. I added this little gusset here in order to strengthen the thing back up. Hopefully it finally fits now. What a pain in the neck. But we finally got this thing installed in the car, and it's not binding up on this thing here. That was the problem I was having earlier. So, got a clutch pedal. All right, ladies and gentlemen, another thing that we need to change on this car, or I guess that I want to change, is the rear. This is a Ford 9-inch, and it's been in the car since we originally built it. And it has always had a spool in the rear suspension. Now, if you guys don't know what a spool is, basically there is no differential in this thing. Both tires are locked together, and there's no difference in speed in this thing at any given time. And I'll be honest, for street driving, I have always hated that spool in the rear suspension of this car. Now, some cars, you can set them up with a spool and they drive okay, but for whatever reason, this thing always drove, I don't know, not the way that I wanted it to. It was likely due to some Ackerman angle or something like that, and I've always wanted to put a limited slip in this thing. We just so happened to have another car that could really use a spool, and this just so happens to have the same exact style of rear suspension. And by the way, it already has a sway bar integrated into the rear suspension, so we get that as well. So if we take the 8.8 out of that has a limited slip, put new clutches in it, put it in here, take the 9-inch that has a spool and put it into there, we should get both projects to where they need to be for the rear differential. So let's get these things swapped. Alright guys, the last hurdle that we have to overcome is we need to get the CV style output shaft on the AR5 and adapt it to something that's a little more usable and a little bit more robust. And for that, we turn to the guys over at Fairmont. This is a kit that they sell that converts the CV style output shaft to a 1350 or 1310 yoke. Depends what you choose in the checkout. And that will allow us to mate up to our drive shaft, which I've just freshly painted. Now, we didn't actually need this part right here. It turned out that our drive shaft already had the correct yoke on it. So let's get this thing bolted up to the transmission and get our drive shaft installed. All right, guys, here is the drive shaft that I hope will work in this car. I actually received this from a friend in a trade, thanks to you, Aaron. This has the collapsible section in the middle of it, which is required when you're running a Pontiac Solstice AR5, because they originally had like a CV joint in the back. So there is no slip yoke or slip yoke conversion that you can get for them. So hopefully this is the right length for what we need. Let's give it a shot. All right, guys, you may notice that the drive shaft changed colors. Well, turns out our drive shaft was a little bit too short. So we had to take it to a drive shaft shop and have it retubed. Basically what they do is they cut the ends off on either end and pull the yokes out of the tube that's in the center, and then they get a longer tube and extend the length. We had to extend it by 2 inches, but now it should fit in the car, so let's get it up in there. Yep, shredded my belt. Nothing left. I saw my voltage go down to less than 12 volts while I was driving, and yep, shredded the belt. Oh well, get another one. Clutch pedal's pretty slow. The clutch in this thing is really slow. Like, I push it in and then I come off and it's like the pedal has to follow my foot. That's why I keep screwing up the shifts. Clutch, push it in, let off, see how long it takes to come up, and it engages like right here. So it's like you try and, you know, quickly shift, and I'm used to clutching the whole way in and then coming off, and it takes forever for it to re-engage the clutch. So yeah, I'm gonna have to address that at some point. But you know, it's a hot rod, there's always something to fix.